Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the documentation office hours. What is the date? It's the 10th of May. It's a little bit special this time because many people from Canonical are in Madrid for this week, and also most of us are here for next week, and there'll be some more people here next week. So we thought it'd be a really good chance for you to see some of us and for us to kind of introduce ourselves and our faces, but also to ask and answer some questions that we've kind of come up with between ourselves that hopefully are not too endangering to our professions, but you know, a bit more revealing about the things that we do and the kind of things that we typically encounter. It's a bit of a weird setup. Also, there are technical authors here in the call with us, so thank you all for joining as well. If you have any questions you'd like to ask us, we've got some pre-prepared questions that we're going to do, but if you do have any questions that you'd like us to perhaps answer after we've finished this kind of Q&A session, please put them in the chat. I hope it's enabled, and we'll answer your questions afterwards. But otherwise, thank you for joining. I'm Graham. I do the documentation on the SnapD team. I don't know, should we go through ourselves and introduce ourselves? I'll hand the mic over to Andrea.
Yeah, I'm Andrea. I'm on the data platform team. We work on a bunch of charms for databases and stuff like this. I'll keep it short for now. We'll probably learn a lot more about each other soon.
Hi, I'm Julia. I will be joining the Multipass team. I am rather new in Canonical, so I'm also really interested in these office hours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shane, and I've just started this Monday, and I'm going to be working on the Ubuntu desktop team with a focus on WSL. And I started on Monday. It's my first time in Madrid. It's my first time at a sprint. It's my first time working in software, and it's my first time working in a technical author role. So this is a week of firsts. So it's going to be very interesting.
Thanks, Shane. You can keep the mic, maybe. So can everyone hear me with two mics? Yeah. Actually, I mean, we have some questions. I don't want to put the focus on you, Andrea, in terms of asking the questions, but maybe I can start by a general kind of broad question of what brought the three of you to technical writing. I'm happy to answer this question as well. I mean, Shane, you've got the mic. Would you like to, what is it that's brought you here?
So when I was in the equivalent of high school in Ireland, my favorite subject was English, but just through a series of life circumstances, I ended up studying science and learning to love science, and I ended up doing a PhD in science, specifically food science, and then I became an academic in food science, and I worked in that for 7.5 years. But that role is very broad. It involves teaching and research and running a lab and managing resources. And ultimately what I loved was explaining things, explaining difficult things, trying to make things easier for people, make things easier for non-experts, communicating to an array of different audiences. So ultimately I settled on what my core interest was, which was explanations, communication, of relevance to technical topics. And at the same time, when I was working in that career, I started writing these very simple pieces of software. I don't consider myself a programmer. I just consider myself someone who does programming. But I started documenting my programs. I started contributing to open source. So eventually my love of writing and also my interest in software just dovetailed at the perfect time because Canonical had some opportunities. And now here I am.
Awesome. Thanks, Shane. Julia.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think many of the technical writers I've met over the years kind of stumbled into this profession by accident. And that was also my case. At the time, I had graduated in mathematics. I had also another degree as a professional translator, but in previous years, I had become really passionate about software, open source, Linux. It was, the web economy, the boom, and everyone was like so fascinated by the communities and all that. And so I had this mix. And when I was thinking, okay, what am I going to do next? Because I discovered developing was not my path in the long term. And by accident, I found this listing for a technical writer. And apparently it was a profession where you had to combine technical expertise, ability to decode complex concepts and developers, so to say, and put them into English in a way that was comprehensible for different audiences. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. And so they gave me a chance, where I went to my first job, and I've been a technical writer ever since. I mean, the role here at Canonical is a bit different because we also drive the practice of documentation, and that's really a very interesting concept. But yeah, it was a mix of accident and like a culmination of different passions, I guess.
Thanks, Julia. And actually, Robert's just joined us. So Robert's another technical author. So but we just basically asked an opening question of what got you into technical writing.
Yeah. Napster. So I'm not sure how many of you have been around at the time of Napster, but it was a service that was like a sort of a precursor of file sharing services, and it was specializing in MP3s. And Napster, such as it was only usable over the internet, of course, and internet where I was at that time was dial-up only. So that was over a telephone line, and it was notoriously unstable. And one of these days, while I was cursing that the internet connection disconnected, and it got disconnected, of course, in the middle of a Napster download, where I was searching for some obscure REM concert recordings or whatever.
It was Kylie Minogue.
Yeah. Then a friend of mine told me, you know what, this connection to over a telephone line is much more stable on Linux. And I was like, I'm all for it. I don't know what that is, but give me. And so I installed Linux, and I never looked back. And the journey was long and winded. I installed first Red Hat Linux because you could order that on floppy disks. And you would feed those 15 floppy disks into a computer, and then you would install it, and then you would inevitably run into dependency hell. And somebody told me, oh, well, there's this distribution called Debian, and it resolves those dependencies much better. And eventually, years passed, I became an editor and then editor-in-chief of a Linux magazine. And then while all of my friends sort of left the freelance space because they were invariably hired by either SUSE or Red Hat, I ended up at Red Hat, and from Red Hat I went to Canonical after some 10 years, and yeah, that's it. I've never studied IT. I've never studied programming or anything of that sort. I also just happen to be the person who does that. But yeah, my actual non-paying interest lies in English literature, which is what I studied, obviously. Yeah.
Thanks, Robert. That was really good. No pressure, Andrea.
Yeah, we got such cool and detailed stories. I don't know how I can make mine better, but the funny thing is that everything that you guys explained, kind of wildly different backgrounds, countries, like everything is different on the individual level, but as a whole, I think we all just kind of started in one place and then realized we have this set of skills that we never thought had a place that would put them all together. And that's exactly what happened to me. For me, it was a physics degree, and then got into software development. I really enjoyed coding, but I realized that in software development jobs, I always found myself being the one that cared about how things were documented, how things were explained, both in terms of the software and also to other people in the company. I realized, it turns out that if you explain something about our technology if you help the marketing or salespeople understand our technology better, then they are really happy, and they're like, wow, that was so useful. Thank you for doing that. And just that kind of interaction with other people that benefited from deeply technical knowledge being translated in a way to them really triggered something in me where I thought, I love this. I love doing this. And yeah, eventually, again, there was casually a position open and at Canonical, and I thought, let's see.
Thank you so much. Everyone's so open, and I didn't anticipate that when I asked the question, because it kind of means I have to be I have to answer that myself. I don't know. So, I mean, I actually failed English at school, but I was a real 80s computer kid. It was the only thing that, when I first saw a BASIC prompt on a home computer, it blew my mind, and it still blows my mind. I got into Amigas and got into programming. I tried doing my own thing. I ended up in an isolated location with a lot of time to myself and started writing Windows software, but then ended up not being able to share that Windows software with anyone. So I stopped. That's where I discovered Linux. It was about 1997, because it was the idea. I couldn't believe that this stuff was being developed at this quality for free. I first started trying to make X Windows work on my Amiga, which didn't work. You could get it to work, but I mean, if you know what, even a 68040, which is what I had at the time, it doesn't work. So I wrote some software, some photo management software, which became really popular and successful. And yeah, Robert said he used it, which is amazing. I can't believe that. I'm still talking about it over 20 years later. But I wasn't a great software developer. I feel like I haven't got that focus, the direct engagement that it perhaps takes to stay on top of that game. And I found writing the documentation parts of that software that I wrote, and also dealing with the translators that provided their own translations, quite a lot more interesting. And I actually applied for a staff writer position at a Linux magazine and got that job, and eventually became the editor, and then forked the magazine and became the editor of another magazine. And we tried that for a while, and then I heard about the job at Canonical for a staff writer, as a technical author, and that's where my journey here started, which was 8.5 years ago. And really, that's what, no massive intention behind that. That's what led me to this position. This is like confessional. Yeah. Are there any questions, perhaps, in the list of questions we prepared after that? I mean, I don't mind looking through. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but
No, that's fine. I get to pick and choose my favorite ones.
yeah.
Okay, I think it's reasonable to start with some of the more serious ones and then leave the spicy ones for last. But one that I really liked, actually, it might be a nice segue from all these introductions. One of the questions that Shane proposed, which is about how TAs at Canonical come from so many different educational backgrounds, and what is it about the role itself that makes this possible? What attributes do we share? If you had to put words to it.
It's Shane's question. Have you given this more thought than the rest of us, Shane? Have you got any thoughts on it?
Maybe the answer to the question will truly emerge once we've all given our answers, because I can't speak for how everyone here, coming from these different backgrounds, approaches the role of a technical author. But for me, I guess it's kind of like how you often hear software developers talking about finding the right level of abstraction when they're approaching a problem that they're trying to solve. So when I think about coming from a background of teaching science and doing scientific research, I try to think, what's the right way of looking at that role I had in relation to the role I have now as a technical author? And someone just looked at me and distracted me. For me, I guess it's about when I was a scientific researcher, I was the expert, and every morning I faced 50 or 250 students who weren't experts, and I had to explain to them the various scientific concepts that I understood very well, and that's very challenging. And I had to realize that maybe some of the ways I communicated my expertise wasn't always the optimal way. And that's the really hard part of teaching. Teaching's a really hard job, trying to take whatever expertise you have and deliver it to people who just don't have that expertise. So now I have that experience of being an expert, but now I'm working in an organization where I'm not the expert. Certainly with respect to software. I love software. I've done some programming. I have an empathy for the challenges that software developers face, because when I've faced minuscule versions of those challenges, when I'm developing my tiny apps, I feel them very strongly, and often I fail. So I know how hard it can be, or I know a tiny part of how hard it can be. And now I'm working with people who are the experts. I have experience of being an expert, but I'm no longer the expert. And I know that these software developers have some difficulty communicating their expertise with people who want to understand the software that they're developing. And often that finds a point of focus in the documentation. So how can I, as someone who knows what it's like to be an expert, who struggles to communicate that expertise, how can I, as someone who's been in that position and try to overcome it, how can I help the organization and the software developers within the organization overcome that specific challenge with the communication of technical topics via the route of the docs? That's the answer I've conjured just now.
I think you really got it right with this. If I had to summarize it, because I also really love not being the expert on something. It's the first time I'm not supposed to be the expert on what I'm working on, and I really like that.
What I really liked was when Julia was talking about her background, and when you were talking about your background, you basically came from the technical side, and then you realized that you also like the language part of the whole equation. And for me, that was the complete opposite. I found, I mean, I enjoyed math and chemistry and stuff like that, but in high school, I've never had the intention of dabbling in technical subjects at the university, and that's why when I first went to uni, I studied English literature, of course, but also political science, stuff like that. And then when I majored and actually got my degree in English literature, the technical writing part or technical communication was basically the only space I could find where I could combine the technology part that I did as a geeky kid and the love for language and exploring that part. And miraculously, when we get the chance to chat among technical authors or even technical writing people in the industry, I find that if I talk about Linux or talk about shell scripting, it's perfectly fine, it flies, as well as does my interest in post-colonial feminist writing. And those people who at one point document software are perfectly capable and willing to engage in a conversation on a topic like that. And that to me is an excellent blend of two interests that on the face of it don't seem connected, but apparently they are for many people. One could argue that we're the weirdos in the room, but at least I found my niche in among the people who could actually and not only could but would and like to combine these two parts of seemingly disparate subjects.
Can I try a quick answer? I think one thing we all have in common is passion. So one thing I've discovered when I was reasoning, throughout the years, trying to explain to people what technical writing is. Yes, you can learn it, you can study it, but I think it has to come from a place within you that it's like a drive to explain stuff to people, to make it clearer, to communicate. I think you must really be passionate to do this job. It's not something that you just learn and then you do it. So from your stories, I think we all landed in this position following some kind of inner drive or passion. Could be maybe it started from developing as Andrea, or maybe tinkering as you guys. But I think that's one thing we have in common.
It's interesting you say that, because my answer was going to be along the lines of I still love programming. I still love development. I feel a bit embarrassed about this because there is a really good developer in the room. But what I love about programming is you encounter a problem. You have no idea how you're going to solve it, and sometimes you have to kind of unravel it in certain ways that aren't obvious. And at the end of it, you have if you manage to solve this problem, you have a proof that you've solved it in the output of whatever it is you're trying to achieve. That's good. But when I encountered documentation problems, it didn't have the same binary output. And I found that actually more interesting. It was more fuzzy, and I still don't have the right answer to it. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to work towards in being a technical author, as a greater focus on the output. I don't know, but that's what excites me about it.
Do we have any input from our other participants? Someone wants to share?
If not,
What was the question again?
yeah.
What what are the shared characteristics that we have? Like, what makes a good technical author or technical writer?
I think it's an interest in reading and writing. It's probably the core. My dad was a naval officer, and he was insistent that I was going to read by the time I was 4. And that resulted in me reading like some 700 books before I was 8 years old. And that got me involved in seeing good writing all the time. And then I would occasionally do good writing, did really good in college in the advanced composition class. The teacher tried to talk me into majoring in English. I wasn't going to do something stupid like that. I was going to be a scientist. I was going to be an engineer. And then eventually, I think some of the technical authors on the call know the story. I got sucked into writing because I wrote some comments when I was writing code for operating systems, and one of my colleagues left, and my boss asked me to write stuff. And that turned into, okay, now you're a technical author. But I think the love of reading and writing. So I think Robert came at it from the right angle to begin with, as an English literature person. And I saw that Ruth said something else. So Ruth, now you got to dive in.
Go for it, Ruth.
That's okay too. So Sally says she thinks it's curiosity, which I think, yeah, we're all vigorously agreeing with. Ruth makes a great point. She said it's trying to be the advocate for the user. I don't know exactly where you're coming from there, but the way I completely agree with it, and the direction I'm coming from there is that I have always been a user, and well, that sounds bad out of context. I've always been a user out of documentation. It got me through my entire life, my entire schooling, my entire career. And I often found myself struggling a lot to understand the given material, textbooks, lectures. I had this conflicting feeling that sometimes I thought I was really smart, sometimes I thought it was particularly thick. I don't know. Like, it was a very contrasting experience. I have different inputs from different people about what intelligence meant, how easily you should understand something. And eventually I found out that it's really all about the way that information is transmitted to you. And actually, in many cases, it's quite the creators of the material that you're looking at haven't thought about it. They haven't considered how the information is architected, how it's presented, what kind of people are reading it. And so maybe it's a bit of kind of not wanting others to struggle with something that could be easily solved by just technical writing. I don't know.
Kind of net efficiency for the human race.
Sure, yeah. And reduction of pain and many hours of studying in vain.
You got a couple of raised hands out there.
Andrea's on it.
Yes, I just want to give a voice to the chat, which is, yeah, Iqbal says that in large part a necessity in their case. If they say, if I don't write proper documentation for some of the projects I love, no one will. That's a great point.
Can we see who's raised their hand first?
Yes, sorry.
So, Damilola.
Yes.
Damilola, do you want to speak? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So for me, I think the technical writing role for me, I really enjoyed it because I think for me it's like out of curiosity. Like to a large extent, when you're writing things, they are usually things that you've never heard of. You probably just get to hear them for the first time, and there's this urge that you want to just learn. You want to like see what this is all about and put it in a very logical format. So to a large extent it's about curiosity. I what I've found out is like to be very hard for someone to like enjoy technical writing if you're not really curious, because to write something logical sometimes you just have to like understand a lot of context. You also like want to like understand your user's point of view, I mean your audience, their pain points, and that might just be the difference between a good writing in technical writing and a bad one might just be the context. Maybe a particular writer lacks the appropriate context to like put it to the audience. I also feel like to a large extent for me personally I enjoy technical writing because you get to wear different hats. So I remember when I was transitioning from law, I was already used to writing as a lawyer, but I got bored out because of the rigid lifestyle, right? And when I was switching to tech, I started with programming. But for programming, I enjoy programming, but I always get bored. At some time, I'm like seated in one place. But when I started writing, I enjoyed it more because you the, the feeling is different, especially when you start working with uh when you're not just doing technical content, but you're actually working with a lot of developers. You get to wear different hats. You get to be like a project manager. You do some user research. uh Sometimes you do some kind of support, maybe like user support. You get to it's a mix of experience. It's just like for every job or for every technical documentation you are working on, it's a different experience and a different combination of skills. That's it for me.
I think Kirtan is next.
Yeah, thank you. So my experience kind of overlaps with Bill's answer. So I think this all stems from the need for expressing something that's probably hard to understand in a better way. So maybe a bit of context about how I became a technical writer will help if you guys don't mind. So I have always felt that I expressed myself in writing better. So all along my childhood, I thought that I'll become a writer. But in my country and culture, when I was like graduating and trying to get into college, there was a lot of pressure around either becoming an engineer or a doctor. So I thought I was taking the easy way out and I chose engineering. 4 years later, I was like one of the typical mass-produced engineers, not knowing like what to do, where I've landed, but my heart was still thinking about writing and getting paid for it. So I was a developer working with content management systems for the first 4 years of my career, but I always used to jump at the chance of documenting anything that needs to be documented. And I kind of became very popular for being that person who wants the chore that no one else wanted. So when I got a break with an org who gave me a chance at being a full-time technical writer, there was no looking back. So I for very long, I felt like I looked at software product documentation only from the angle of writing about something. But like through the years, my outlook has changed and it has changed a lot and revolutionary became a different thought when I joined Canonical. So right now, I think this role makes me think about documentation almost from a philosophical angle, making me think deeper about the problems that needs to be solved for the user. So I will confess that I still struggle a little bit at that, but I love that I'm struggling to understand documentation from a different perspective, because that struggle is what makes me get up every day and think about like, okay, how can I make this better? So I think that passion, that commitment to documentation and wanting to express better is there in all of us.
Bastian says that to them it's a matter of empathy and fairness, the will to do right by the users of software who cannot read all the source code if it's even available, which is a good point, and also the taste for sharing information and knowledge and a taste for technology. That captures the essence very nicely.
I want to hand the mic back to you, but do you want to try and ask another question from our list?
Yeah. Okay, I can't wait anymore. I want to ask this one. I'm going to combine two questions that I think are similar enough. One of them comes from Kirtana, which is, what piece of documentation that you wrote or reviewed led you to your first ever corporate fistfight?
Oh,
And I think it's valid to combine that with one of Graham's questions, which is, what's the most trouble you've been in with documentation? So either one works. I just want the tea.
I do have the mic, but so this is the world before technical authoring. When I worked in magazines, should I say? Yeah, I should. So I was the editor of a magazine, and you commission features, the cover feature, well in advance of when you want to publish it, and the art team work together to create an illustration that typically goes on the cover. And then I would usually review this, maybe mistakenly, a couple of days before the magazine goes to press. And when I reviewed the feature, it was awful. It wasn't something that we could use, and something that shouldn't be represented on the front cover. So we had this last minute decision to make. And fortunately, there were a lot of items that happened to be in the magazine about security and about encryption, about securing your own systems by finding backdoors in systems. And so we had this idea that we'll make that selection of security documentation tutorials the main event for the magazine, and we needed a cover. And so we flippantly put on the cover, in just words, because we had no design time, learn to hack. Everything you need to be a bad person, basically, in the subtext. And we were very happy with this. We sent the magazine to be printed, and a couple of weeks later, when the magazine became available, there was a huge furore across wherever we sold it. Barnes and Noble in the US banned the magazine. WH Smith in the UK threatened to ban the magazine. It became a big story across the internet, led to really big discussions about what it is that. And I didn't ask this question meaning to answer it in this way. I didn't think I'd have to actually answer it. But my boss, the publisher, was like terrified of the consequences of this. We sold a lot of issues. Oh no. Sorry, we lost the internet connection there. Can everybody still hear us?
Yeah, now you're back.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to have a go?
So a slightly different perspective, but you've all been in a situation where documentation is perceived as a sort of a second-class citizen, and as you've all been through that, a part of the job is also advocating for documentation and making sure the documentation actually has a seat at the table. And so the story that I have in mind, no names, no product names, no nothing, involves that that sort of a feeling of vindication, that where it turned out that documentation was an inseparable part of the eventual success of something. At one point during my technical writing career, I was assigned a bunch of tasks that were long term, and there I had my work cut out. But I found myself just wanting to dabble with in something else a little bit. And so I found an outlet for this urge in a project that was very new at the company, and that had no documentation resources assigned whatsoever. And I started to help out the engineers by providing documentation for that with a fellow technical writer. And once this came to light, a manager, indirectly involved with the project, became very angry and said, okay, so there's no call for that, and there's no need for you to waste your capacity on this. There's no documentation needed. This is a proof of concept thing, and so forth. Well, long story short, the project blew up. It became very successful, and at one point, the company decided to go public with the project and make it generally available. And at that point, this same manager who basically threatened us with some dire consequences if we continued working on that, because that was outside the scope of our work, was sort of put on the spot as the responsible person for that project. And one of the things that was demanded of the team was that there would be a complete documentation. So this person all of a sudden found themselves in a position where they could draw upon the work that has been happening on the documentation front. And famously, to many giggles and giggles from us, the technical writers presented that project alongside with a complete documentation set, very proudly, that see, this is how we work. We think of everything, including documentation. And so we felt vindicated, and also very chuffed by having been so kind of blindsided.
Thanks, Robert. I actually, going back to my story, I should have added that one of the reasons why we were able to get it through and to resist all of this storm of outrage was that we were arguing for documentation. The fact that we don't do security through obscurity, which is what a famous security expert, Bruce Schneier, says we shouldn't do. You have to write about it, and I think that is our burden and obligation.
Maybe a slightly tangential. So it's about being punched in the face by someone, and I was kind of punched in the face by academia itself in the context of a specific project, which helped push me towards software in a weird way. And it was, my expertise was in food science, so I was very interested in food. And early on in my scientific career, I saw this really interesting paper where a food scientist had basically tried to develop an algorithmic approach to generating new combinations of ingredients. And I had somehow got to that point in my mid-20s without basically ever seeing a computer program. And I'd never seen a computer program in a food science paper. This was the only one, and it was the only one I ever saw in a food science paper. So I started studying this this particular kind of formalism, this symbolic notation that this scientist had used. And he referenced some earlier developments in the history of the notation of the notation that's used in chemistry, like the chemical equations that people study in school. And eventually I realized I had to really engage with this topic, I had to go and get a philosophy degree. So I got a philosophy degree while I was in academia, and I learned formal logic. And then I contacted a scientist who had written this this formalism, and I said, I think we can put this on a stronger logical footing, and also I think we can try to explain better how this algorithm works. And instead of using this software that he'd use a proprietary Maple software for like scientific computing, I said, let's use Python, something open source, free and open source. Let's write a paper that uses an open source programming environment. Let's establish a formal foundation for this notation, and let's develop examples of how we can apply this to. They have a concept in video game programming called procedural generation. It was basically, it's procedural generation for food. And I was just completely absorbed in this for about 6 years. And I submitted a publication on my own to a philosophy journal, a really big one, and it was rejected after a review period of about 10 months. So that took me to, I don't know, add another year on top of that process. And then the collaboration between me and the scientists kind of fizzled out. So I was there after several years, and I thought, I could have just written a blog about this, or I could have just made a GitHub repo about this 5 years ago. And then I started to think, what am I doing with this way of sharing information with the world? There's other ways. And then that's when I became really fascinated with how software developers and technical writers and technical authors share their information with the world. And it's one I think still to this day, one of the most interesting things you can do on the internet is just like find interactions between people who love software. There's just such interesting open debates and discussions, often very heated, often very human. And that was very inspiring to me. And I think it's a big reason why I made the shift.
Thanks, Shane. Yeah.
I just really need to, highlight this and make sure that this does not fall through the cracks, or, this is not forgotten, because, in explaining, the background of the story, you just casually said, so I went and got a philosophy degree. I think, that's the sort of a shortcut in thinking and speaking that, emphatically describes the kind of nerdiness that is probably required, for the fusion of, of those interests that we talk about. Because I love that, and that's a great comment. And
got any questions?
Let's see. I'll get one.
Or from has anybody asked any questions in the comments?
Well, Sally makes a great point and says that academia is great for punching people in the face. Oh, great at, but great for as well if you wanna, if you're in the position of reviewing papers, I guess. Iqbal doesn't disagree, but philosophy is definitely special. Maybe I can go on to one of the questions I've been eyeing. I'm very interested in Julia's answer to her own question about writer's block. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Do you feel intimidated by a blank page, or rather a brand new topic to document?
Okay, as many of us at this point, I guess, yeah, like Kirtana, I also thought I was going to be a writer. I was really determined to be a writer. I didn't plan on writing technical concepts. I actually wanted to be like a novelist or something. But so yeah, I know the feeling of having like a blank WordPress page, blank Word document, blank whatever, notepad even. When it comes to documentation, technical documentation, I think in a way it's easier to overcome writer's block because you know what you're going to write about. So maybe you can start with a mind map. You can start jotting down ideas randomly and build from there. But I think it's still scary because, where do you start from? And as I think Graham said maybe in a previous session, that sometimes you write something and you think it's pretty okay. And the next day you read it and it's like, what is this? Like, what did I even write? And scratch and start again. So I think writer's block maybe doesn't 100% apply to technical writers, but it's an issue. Like, where do I start from? Do I start from a main concept? Do I start from just some random notes? What do you guys do? I mean, do you even think about the blank page or not?
I mean, I do. I think the equivalent problem is being faced with something technical to document. There's been quite a few examples where a developer has provided some information on something that needs to be documented, and firstly, you don't understand what it does or what it's for, how it's going to fit anywhere, but also it doesn't make any sense, and you don't know how you're going to unravel the many threads in that piece of documentation into something that other normal users are going to be able to use and find useful. And I struggle with that a lot. And that's a bit like the thing I was talking about before about programming. I actually don't have an answer to how to do it. Often I can struggle with it for hours, and I think I said this before, but I found that going away, going out into the fresh air and forgetting it will often, if I've thought about something enough, the answer will kind of just pop into my head. And maybe that's like software development, I don't know. But the answer, and it might be the next day, or it might even be a week later. So I don't have an answer other than I think, you're not going to find the answer staring at the blank page.
Yeah, I agree with that. The idea is always start writing something and then see if it fits with the other pages, the other topics. And if it doesn't, do it again. Just, yeah. I think it's easier with documentation though, because, the topic is a bit clearer.
Yeah, and there's often, the inverse problem too, which is writing too much. And like that's been a problem I've had in the past with any type of writing I've done, is being so eager to start and being so eager to get the words down, and thinking I can just edit this all together eventually, and then becoming too attached with the things that you've written. I think that for me has always been a bigger problem, is fighting the tendency to try to, I guess, over document things, and then what would they call it in software? Like the technical debt you give yourself, the kind of your future self then needs to deal with the incredible editing task that you've given yourself. So I think especially in the context of technical writing, making a plan, establishing clearly what people actually want from the documentation, who's going to read it, can help you both in terms of facing a blank page, but also in terms of avoiding scope creep, I guess.
So we actually have a raised hand from Usman. Do you want to ask a question, Usman? Make a comment?
Hi, hello. Can you
Hello.
hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, thank you for everything. So I really enjoyed this session. So, but my own question is kind of, I don't know, so I will just try to so my own question is for me particularly, how do I get into technical writing? It's just trying to write about what I love or something like that, trying to write about how does operating system works and architecture and stuff like that. So that is my own way of getting into documentation, and probably I just say, okay, I think I read something on Python official documentation, it was some kind of I see okay, I can improve on this. So I just felt writing documentation or technical writing is just something I do for fun, or just for because I like it or something like that. So making it a career, I'm in college right now, studying computer science. So because most of you guys are probably doing it as a career, stuff like that. So in career line, what would be your kind of advice for someone like me, because I have lot of options, is it coding, is it networking, is it lot of options. So, and saying I want to be just career path, I don't know, I don't know if you
Really good
get the question, yeah, and based on my own context,
Yeah.
I'm currently in
Yeah.
in college, figuring out what will I do after college, or just going through multiple stuff.
Robert. Yeah.
I think probably the easiest answer, even though it's not a fix-all answer, would be if I listening to what everyone here had to say, and also Kirtana and others. It was never really a cold turkey start. You would start from zero, and all of a sudden you would find yourself being a technical writer, or in the technical communication field. For all of us, it was the interest that drove us to doing something. Andrea mentioned that she was doing programming stuff, but she found herself being drawn to actually also explaining that stuff, while others would not. You started writing for a magazine, but that was just because you like the language part also, as opposed to only programming. Kirtana had similar story. Found herself being an engineer and not actually loving it from the start. Julia, similarly, myself, I ventured to a website, and I saw somebody asking a question about how to, I believe the first question was how to play some sort of a video or whatever, something, and that happened to be the thing that I was struggling with the week before. So I wrote a lengthy answer, and I get approached by the person who was running the website and said, why don't you turn this into an article? And from that, I discovered that I actually liked it, and I from one article I went to 2 articles and eventually 500. And so my point there is that one probably shouldn't put a whole lot of pressure on themselves and start easy. Start with the small stuff. Start what you actually like doing, because it may very well turn out that you don't enjoy that, and that's perfectly fine. But if you do, and if you enjoy doing the little things, then you might start doing the bigger things, and you might find your own way, or your own take on things, and then develop it into perhaps a career or just a hobby, or something that fits you. But I would probably discourage anyone from thinking that, okay, so it's a career, I have to start. There's probably nothing wrong in studying that, or taking courses or something like that, but not not forcing it, because then it wouldn't be enjoyable. And while I recognize that we live in a world where we actually have to work to earn money, it's still probably better while we had the chance to do it in a way that we find some enjoyment in.
And I think if the collection of us is anything, you realize that we all come from quite different and diverse backgrounds. But what Julia said about passion, that we all kind of really ended up caring about it. Maybe we didn't realize we did, but it also sounds like you really care about it already. So, I mean, I did computer science as well. I mean, there's nothing wrong in doing that. And if you have a passion for doing documentation, carry on and carry on contributing to documentation, and you may find you want to apply for roles to do with documentation.
We have 5 minutes. I don't know if it's enough, but I really wanted to end on this one question by Sally, because to bring together the good things of technical writing, despite all the struggles, which is, what's the best compliment you've ever had about your writing? Because that's honestly it's indescribable how good it feels when somebody appreciates your writing or your help in clarifying stuff. So I would love to hear when you've been complimented.
I'll start because it's super quick. I think the best compliment for me was someone actually coming up to me to acknowledge the fact that they had read the documentation and it was helpful, in saying, thank you. Oh, you wrote this. This is amazing. It really helped me, blah, blah, blah. And it was like totally like unexpected, because, usually people, they don't read the documentation. So for me, just having someone come up to me and say, thank you, this was clear, it helped me, that was like, made my day every time.
Sorry for calling it. I guess mine is in the context of teaching a kind of engineering class, and it was engineering in the context of manufacturing some light fluid dynamics kind of material, and
After the philosophy, yeah.
and the students, just the core of students we had weren't very, they weren't very strong mathematicians or anything. So like, just I acknowledged that up front, and that's how I wrote my notes. As I considered that these are students that I would expect to not enjoy this material. And I taught the class, and then at the end, one of the guys in the class was like, normally I hate this stuff. Normally I hate this kind of class, this engineering stuff. But I really got it when I did your class and I read your notes. And like, every student didn't say that, but one student said that. But that kind of feedback, making something that's, I guess, normally, like, just because something looks hard and is difficult, like, it doesn't have to look that way. Like, there may be another way of presenting it. And I really like getting that feedback.
I realized this. I just thought of an anecdote that probably, I think might be worth hearing, that I really liked, and it's not a really compliment on my writing, but before the pandemic, I used to present a lot at conferences, different industry events, and so forth. And at one point, I was doing a presentation at an event that used to be called LinuxCon. Now it's called Open Source Summit, and it was about technical writing or technical communication. And then about 3 or 4 years after that, I did like a different presentation, but I also involved technical communication at a different open source summit in a different part of the world. And after that presentation, a person came up to me and said, "Hi, you don't know me, but I saw you back 4 years ago in a completely different part of the world, and you had a presentation about technical writing, and I liked it so much that I actually started doing that, and I pursued a career that, and now I've been hired writer at an open source company, and I saw that you were presenting over here, and I have a presentation about something completely different elsewhere in this conference, and I just wanted to come up to you and say, hey, you're the one who inspired me to do that 4 years ago at a different conference and different hemisphere." And I love that. That didn't reflect anything about my writing, which very well could have been disastrous, but I really enjoyed that that person, they actually made the time, and they came up to me to tell me that.
Thanks, Robert. I mean, just to put a realistic spin on this, I think from my experience, as long as people are using it, if nobody makes a comment, if nobody complains, if nobody emails me or pings me on whatever social media network or leaves a forum post, then that's almost the best compliment, because I assume it's working. So it's everybody's responsibility to let us know when things aren't working, or maybe to give us a +1 when things are working. We've just about hit the hour. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. I didn't realize it was going to be such an open-hearted kind of session, but I really appreciate it. Things have officially ended here for us after this week, so everybody's done this voluntarily. Thank you, everybody who joined us on the meet. We're really grateful that everybody's still engaging with the project and the open documentation. And we'll try and do something similar this time next week. I hope you all have a good weekend, and see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.